your copy from last week when we were not able to get to Bible study. I'm good. Anybody need one? I made, I think, 20, 25 copies. Hey, if you look on your guide, your listening guide, we're going to look at 4 chapters, but don't panic. We're not going to look at every verse. Not even, I wouldn't even say every verse of every chapter. We're going to be kind of skipping around. I'll be back and forth. And so I'm going to really need you to give me your undivided attention tonight because we've got a lot of ground to cover. And you're saying, why are you doing these 4 chapters? Because all of these 4 chapters deal with the same subject matter. As we talk about David's son, Absalom. You remember Absalom? He is one of several sons that David has from among his many wives at this point. There is a reason why God said, one woman for one man for one lifetime, right? You say, well, why did people like Solomon, who had all of these concubines, who had all of these wives, and I jokingly said with each one of those wives came a mother-in-law, right? Had somebody get offended by that. It was a mother-in-law that got offended by it. So, you've heard me say this before, not everything listen very close to what I'm about to say, because I want you to say, oh, Brother Bill doesn't believe the Bible. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that not everything that the Bible records does the Bible condone. Does that make sense? And one of the things I'm grateful about the Bible that God has given us is that we get to see not just the things that made people like David great, Solomon great, Joseph great. Sometimes we get to see a side of them that, they're just like me. They're just like me, They had some hang-ups. You look at the life of David. You've also heard me say this. I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but David was probably the greatest king in Israel's history. But when you look at David's life and thinking, man, what a great king he was, all the things that he accomplished, he defeated Israel's enemies, he led them well. But I'll tell you what he was a terrible dad. Just a terrible, terrible dad. Anybody familiar with Galatians chapter 6, about verse 7 or so, that reads something like this, be not deceived, God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man sows, that shall he also reap. Now that's in the New Testament. We're looking at the Old Testament tonight, and I would say to you tonight that if there was a New Testament verse that's proved out by an Old Testament life, it would be David. And we're going to see that what David did, really going all the way back to what he did with Bathsheba. And by the way, was God pleased with that? Not at all. Not at all. In fact, here's what I want you to do. I know we're looking at chapters 14 and following, but I want you to go back and pick up on something. When Nathan came to confront David, this is chapter 12, by the way. Find chapter 12, 2 Samuel chapter 12. And let me read verses 7 through 11, and then I want you to underscore something. I don't recall having underscore this when we went through it. But 2 Samuel chapter 12 and verse 7 says, this is when Nathan, the preacher, if you will, Nathan, the prophet, if you will, came to confront David about his sin. Remember, he gave him an illustration. He said, David, what do you think about this rich guy who took from this poor guy, took the only thing that this poor guy had at the expense to have this elaborate party for his friends? And remember what David said? The Bible says that David became very angry. And he said, that guy deserves death. And then here in verse 7, Nathan, and I don't think Nathan did this. I think with a very broken heart, Nathan said, you are that man. Now watch this. Beginning in verse 7 of 2 Samuel chapter 12, you follow along as I read. Then Nathan said to David, you are the man. Again, I don't think he said this forcefully. I think he said this with a broken heart because he's David's friend too. And then notice what he says. He says, thus says the Lord God of Israel, I anointed you king over Israel. I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house and your master's wives into your keeping and gave you the house of Israel and Judah. And if that had been too little, watch this, I also would have given you much more. Then why have you despised the commandment of the Lord to do evil in his sight? You have killed Uriah the Hittite with a sword. You have taken his wife to be your wife, have killed him with the sword of the people of Ammon. Now therefore, watch this. Now therefore, the sword shall never depart from your house, because you have despised me and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. Why did he take her to be his wife? He still had a sin to cover up. Remember what that was? He had an affair with her, and after that affair, she became pregnant. Still got to be, because everybody knows that Uriah did not go home. David, you got some splaining to do. And then lock in on verse 11, this opening statement from verse 11. He goes on to say, thus says the Lord. In fact, I want you to read this opening statement with me out loud. Behold, I will raise up adversity against you. Now watch this. From your own house. And what God is saying to David here, and David says, I'm worthy of death. And God's not going to kill you, David. But guess what? You are going to have adversity. You are going to have conflict. And guess what? You won't be asking, hey, when is it going to come? You're going to ask, hey, where is it going to come? Because it's going to be a constant thing. As you know, we moved into that next chapter. Remember what happened? He had a son named Amnon. Remember that? Who, again, had a sick feeling toward his own sister, right? He sexually abuses her. Remember that? And if you'll remember the story, and again, I'm not going to get into the graphic details here, but the other brothers, particularly Absalom, was just absolutely livid because David did nothing about it. There was no discipline. There was no outcast of Amnon for what he did to David's own daughter. Now, think about this. No discussion, and I got an idea why David didn't do that. Because think about it. What had David just done? David was just as guilty as Amnon was, even though it wasn't his family. But how was David going to speak with some authority to his own son about, hey, you've done immoral here? But Dad, I'm just following what you do. It was just not going to be a good thing. But again, that doesn't let David off the hook. David is still the father here, and David should have done something about it. And Absalom, if you'll remember, is livid that his father didn't do anything about it. You remember the story. Absalom he becomes a vigilante, if you will. He takes matters in his own hand, and he himself has Amnon killed, executed, if you will. And as a result, David is grieving the death of his son Amnon. In fact, he gets word that, hey, there was this war that took place among your kids, and guess what? Every one of your sons are dead. Obviously was not true, right? Just one. And Absalom, he flees because he doesn't know, hey, is my head now on the chopping block? Well, that's where we catch up to chapter 14 and going forward. Again, David is the king of Israel, but he has an estranged relationship with that of his son, Absalom. A great king, but a horrible, horrible father. And what's going to happen here is I tell you that, remember what he said? God told him in chapter 12, verse 11, hey, I'm going to bring adversity to you, and guess what? It's going to come from your own family. We've already saw the beginning stages of that. Well, it's going to get worse tonight because when he goes, he's starting to miss Absalom. Absalom had gone for a period of about 3 years. He's going to bring Absalom back, but when he brings him back, and we're going to see this in just a moment, he brings him back to Jerusalem, but still, after having not seen him 3 years, still has nothing to do with him for another 2 years. It's just a strange, strange thing. And Absalom gets frustrated with his dad that he seeks to, you know what? If my dad can't act like a king, then why be a king? I will be king. Well, this is the story that we pick up, beginning in chapter. Matter of fact, I want you to go to the end of chapter 13, lock in on verse 39. We kind of pick up, by the way, going back to verse 34, 37, and 38, these three verses have this in common, that Absalom fled. Absalom is worried about his own life and life, the fact that he's killed his brother. Then you come to verse 39 of 2 Samuel chapter 13. It says, and David, watch this, longed to go to Absalom, right? For he had been comforted concerning Abner because he was dead. David had this longing to go see his son and to have some kind of relationship with him. Now you come into chapter 14. Let me just read the first 5 verses. And so Joab, the son of Uriah, perceived that the king's heart was concerned about Absalom. Okay? So you think about it, in verse 39 of chapter 13, we're told that David has this longing to go see or to bring back or to have some kind of relationship with his son Absalom. Now again, David is king. Wouldn't you agree that as king you could do whatever you want? So Joab's probably thinking, why haven't you done it? You know? Again, David's probably still eating up with some guilt here. And so chapter 14, verse 1 says, and so Joab, the son of Zeruiah, perceived that the king's heart was concerned about Absalom. So here's what he does, and I'm not going to read all of these verses. He's going to call a woman by the name of Tekoa, and he's going to say, hey, I need you to do me a favor. No, this is not a favor. I'm ordering you to do this, right? I'm going to give you a play-by-play script, and you're going to go to the king, and you're going to give him this fictitious story because I need to get him to do something. And the story was that her husband's died. She has this kind of a conflict, and she's going to the king, and I need your help. And she basically tells a sob story, okay, to the king. And the king says, well, what can I do for you? She tells this sob story, and it ends up where King David, like, hey, I get the picture. I need to have this relationship with my son. Well, here we go. Chapter 14, verse 2. And Joab sent to Tekoa and brought from there a wise woman and said to her, please pretend to be a mourner and put on a mourning apparel. Do not anoint yourself with oil, but act like a woman who's been mourning a long time for the dead. Go to the king and speak to him in this manner. So Joab put the words in her mouth. And when the woman of Tekoa spoke to the king, she fell on her face to the ground, prostrated herself, and said, help, O king. And the king said to her, what troubles you? And then she goes on to tell the story. She answered, indeed, I am a widow. My husband is dead, and she's needing some help. If you look at verse 11, please let the king remember the Lord your God, and do not permit the avenger of blood to destroy anymore, lest they destroy my son. And she's talking about this murder, okay? And he says to her in latter part of verse 11, as the Lord lives, not one hair of your son shall fall to the ground. Verse 12, therefore the woman said, please let your maidservant speak another word to my lord the king. And he said, say on. Verse 13, so the woman said, why then have you, now watch this, schemed such a thing against the people of God? For the king speaks this thing as one who is guilty, in that the king does not bring his banished one home again. Now, that takes a lot of guts for her to say that to the king, but guess what? Who told her to do that? Joab did, okay? Skip down to verse 21 of chapter 14. David basically says, all right, I get the picture here. I get the picture. I get it. So in verse 21, he says, and the king said to Joab, all right, I have granted this thing. Go therefore and bring back the young man Absalom. And so here's that first blank for you. We see Absalom's return. Again, he's been gone for a period of about 3 years. He had fled for his own life because he didn't know what kind of judgment it was going to be upon his head. David's wanting this relationship with him, so he sends Joab. Joab gets this woman to come give this sob story and basically just kind of almost like Nathan. Hey, why haven't you gone to get your own son, right, who was guilty of avenging death? Well, okay, I get the picture. So verse 21, all right, I've granted this thing. Go therefore, bring back the young man Absalom. Now watch what happens here in verse 22. Then Joab fell to the ground on his face and bowed himself, thanked the king. And Joab said, today your servant knows that I have found favor in your sight, my lord, O king, that the king has fulfilled the request of his servant. So Joab, now watch this, arose, went to Geshur, and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. But this is where it gets really strange. David's been longing to have this relationship with his son. He's been gone for a period of 3 years. He's finally convinced, hey, you need to go get him. You have this desire in your heart, go get him. Go get him and bring him back to me. But then notice what verse 24 says. Is this not strange? And the king said, let him return to his own house, but do not let him see my face. So Absalom returned to his own house, but did not see the king's face. If you skip down to verse 28, we find out how long it was. And Absalom dwelt 2 full years in Jerusalem. And what happened? Or let me rephrase that. What didn't happen? What didn't happen? He didn't see his father's face. So think about this. Absalom's almost become a prisoner in his own home. So what good was it to bring Absalom back if you're not going to have a relationship with him? What would y'all say? This is interaction time. I mean, I'm just talking about, we're not talking about us, what would we do, but we're just saying, looking at it, outsider looking into this story, would say, well, David, why even bring him back if you're not going to have this interpersonal relationship with you? In fact, you're not just not having a relationship with him, but you're forbidding him to come to you, right? Now, put yourself in Absalom's case. If you know the story, you already know what he's thinking. All right, hey, my dad is called for me. I've come back, but he's told me basically to stay at my own house and not to come around. How would that make you feel? Would it make you feel resentful? This means yes, this means no. Angry? Yeah, Absalom did not have to come back, but he did. But he was afraid that, hey, maybe my dad would have me killed. I don't know, right? So, yeah, I think that's right. I think he felt like that he did what he felt like his father should have done, because this was a condemnable thing that son did to death, right? Well, he's come back, but again, he's become a prisoner in his own house. And so I think that Absalom's going to move from being hurt to being resentful to, somebody used the word anger. And now I think he's probably leaning toward the path of, you know what? I'm going to rebel. You say, why do you think that? Well, look at verse 25. Now, in all Israel, now Absalom's got something going for him. In all of Israel, there was no one who was praised as much as Absalom for his, for his looks, right? From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish in him. Somebody mentioned hair. In fact, when you look at verse 26, it says, when he cut the hair of his head at the end of every year, he'd only get haircut once a year. At the end of every year, he cut it because it was heavy on him. And when he cut it, he weighed the hair of his head 200 shekels according to the king's standard. And 200 shekels, I think, is right around 5 pounds. Right, 5 pounds of hair. So he had some locks, if you will, of hair, and we're told that he was a super nice looking guy, and certainly he had that in his favor, right? And you come down to verse 27, to Absalom, we're told, were born 3 sons and 1 daughter, and what was the daughter's name? Tamar. What's significant about that? That's the same name as his sister, so he named her, his daughter, after his own sister. She was a woman of beautiful appearance, and then verse 28, and Absalom dwelt 2 full years in Jerusalem, but did not see the king's face. Well, I'm not going to read these next several verses to the end of chapter 14, but let me just kind of give you a quick summary of them for time's sake. What ends up happening is that now Absalom has gone stir crazy. He says, look, Joab, I can't go see my father. He won't let me come see him. So Joab, I need you to get word to my father that I want to see my father. Bring him to me, or I'm coming to him, or bring me to him. Do something about this. He didn't send that message once. He sends it not twice, but then the third time. The first time he sent it, it was a deaf ear to Joab. Joab is not seemingly willing to help him. And so Absalom is convinced that, you know what, I've now got to get Joab's attention. So he got some guys, hey, I want you to go burn his field, go burn his crops. Now, how do you think that's going to sit with Joab? Not going to sit well with Joab at all. In fact, Joab confronts him in verse 31, and Joab arose. Well, he accomplished what he wanted. He got Joab to show up. Then Joab arose and came to Absalom's house and said, why have your servants set my field on fire? And Absalom answered Joab, look, I sent to you saying, come here so that I may send you to the king to say. Now, what is he basically doing here? It's your fault that your crops are burning, right? Because I sent to you and you ignored me, right? Go speak down to verse 33. So Joab went to the king and told him, and when he had called for Absalom, he came to the king and bowed himself to his face to the ground before the king. Then the king kissed Absalom. All good, right? Things are great. Couldn't be better. Everything's hunky-dory, right? You know the story, right? When I look at this, and it says that he came to the king and bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king. Then the king kissed Absalom. You can see him coming in. He's trying to show respect to his father, but knowing all along, because we're going to see this in chapter 15, the rebellion that's in his heart. You ever heard the story of a mom who told her 7-year-old, hey, you're going to go get in timeout. I want you to go sit in that corner and think about what you just did. And came back about an hour later and just said, you think you've learned any lesson? No. Well, then you sit there a little longer until you've learned that lesson, to which he said, well, I may be sitting on the outside, but I'm standing on the inside. Absalom is bowing down to show respect for his father on the outside, but on the inside, he's anything but showing respect for his father. Now watch this. Chapter 15. We see not only his return, that's point number 1. Now we see his rebellion. Now you notice I got out beside your Roman numeral there, chapters 15 through 17. So we're covering 3 chapters. Now here's what I'm going to have to do tonight for time's sake. I'm going to have to jump around. You're just going to, again, do your best. I know it's raining outside. When it rains, I get sleepy. So I hope I don't go to sleep teaching this lesson. So try to stay with me tonight because we've got some ground to cover. We're going to just kind of jump around some verses tonight because there's a ticking time bomb going off in the heart of Absalom and what he's about to do to his father. But let me point out something to you. I hope that you'll write this in your notes somewhere because I don't think I gave you this verse. In verse 1 of chapter 15, it says, and after this, it happened that Absalom provided himself with chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. There's a verse of scripture that I want you to write down. It's Psalm 20 and verse 7. Psalm 20, verse 7. Does anybody know what that verse says? That verse simply says this: some trust in chariots, some trust in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God. Now here's the thing about that. God strictly forbid his people to have horses and chariots. And you want to know why? Because this is what other nations did, okay, as a means of showing military firepower, if you will, military dominance to other nations. Israel, even though they wanted a king to be like other nations, but guess what? God still wanted them to understand, guess what? You don't need bombs, you don't need torpedoes, you don't need cannons, you don't need all of these other things. You know why? Because I'm going to be your defense system. I will be the one who will make the difference. It's not you plus your horses and your chariots. It's you plus me that makes the majority. Right? And so what does he do? He gets this. Why does he do this? Because he wants to give this betrayal to those that he's now trying to recruit to be part of his entourage to overthrow the kingdom of his dad, okay, in order that people say, hey, this is the kind of guy that we want to follow. He's got all of this frustration pent up inside of him. In fact, verse 2, look what he does. This is pretty brazen on his part. Verse 2 says, now Absalom would rise early and stand beside the way of the gate. Circle that word gate, because if we were going to move this to modern times, this would be a lot like standing outside the courthouse of their day. Okay, the gate was where the people of Israel would come to, either on a daily basis or a weekly basis or a monthly basis, and if they had disputes, they would come to the gate or the courthouse to have their disputes settled, right? Hey, we're going to take this to court, if you will. So guess what he does? Absalom arises early and stands beside the way of the gate. So it was when anyone who had a lawsuit came to the king for a decision that Absalom would call to him and say, hey, what city are you from? The person would answer what city he's from. And he would say, hey, your servant is from such and such and from a tribe of such and such. Verse 3, now watch what Absalom does. He would say, hey, why don't you tell me what your case is? Okay? Look, your case is, and then he would say, hey, I think you've got a good case. I think you've got a good argument. But guess what? There's no representative of the king that can help you here, right? You see what he's doing? Verse 4, moreover, Absalom would say, oh, that I were made judge in the land. Everyone who was of any suit of cause would come to me, and I would give him justice. Here's what he's saying. If I were king, I would agree with you. Your wrongs, I would make right. Right? That's what he's doing here. Verse 5, so it was when anyone came near to bow down to him that he would put out his hand and take him and kiss him. Verse 6, in this manner Absalom acted toward all Israel who came to the king for judgment. And then pay close attention to what verse 6 says. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. What's he doing? Slowly but surely, he's pulling the kingdom from his father. He's trying to gain. These people who were once loyal to David now have, again, think about Absalom. He's a good-looking guy, probably a Mr. Universe buff-looking guy. There's some outward appeal about him. He's speaking their kind of language. But then notice what he does. And by the way, he's doing all this behind his father's back. He is royalty. He's part of the family. But look, he takes it a step further. Verse 7. Now it came to pass after 40 years that Absalom said to the king, talking about David, please let me go to Hebron and pay the vow which I made to the Lord. For your servant took a vow while I dwelt in Geshur in Syria, saying, if the Lord indeed brings me back to Jerusalem, then I will serve the Lord. Can you imagine David? Be still my heart. My son loves the Lord. He loves God. He loves him so much that, he's a spiritual dude. He's going to go pay his vow to God. Isn't that sweet? At least David thinks that. And this is not good English, but he ain't got no intention of going and making a vow to the Lord. You know what he's going to go? He wants to be given an excuse to leave Jerusalem, to go to another part of Israel, to guess what? Win the hearts of the people. But guess where he goes? Where does the Bible tell us that he went? Where? Yeah. Where did he go? Y'all say that with me. Hebron. No, you're saying it right. But does that not ring a bell? This is where David first became king. Y'all remember that? David was king of Hebron, or in Hebron, before he became king of all Israel. Remember that? Isn't this interesting? Stay with me. Skip down to verse 10. David is, I'm sure he's proud as a peacock. My son, what a godly young man that is. Man, he's gotten right with God. Oh, David. Absolutely. In fact, Amnon was supposed to be the heir, but he committed a dastardly act, and he can't be the heir now. Why? Because he's dead, right? Watch this. Verse 10 says, Then Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then you shall say, Absalom reigns in Hebron. And Absalom sent 200 men invited from Jerusalem, and they went among the innocent, went along innocently, and did not know anything. And then look very closely at verse 12. Then Absalom sent for Ahithophel, underscore that name, the Gileonite, David's counselor, underscore that phrase so you know who he is, from his city, from Gilo, while he offered sacrifices, and the conspiracy grew strong, for the people with Absalom, watch this, continued, increased in number. Now, what's important about this is if Absalom is going to overthrow his dad or rip the kingdom from his father, he's not going to be able to do it by himself. He's going to need some help. And I think I've given you two names, right? Ahithophel and Shammai, right? We're going to look at both of these guys. Now, what was Ahithophel? As we just saw right here, Ahithophel, let me kind of give you a little background about this guy. Ahithophel was a trusted advisor of David. Anytime that David needed counsel, no doubt he would return to Ahithophel. And I don't think there's any doubt that Ahithophel gave wise counsel to David, and David would act on what Ahithophel told him. And so Absalom, trying to be a smart guy, thinking, well, here's what I will do. I will go to someone who really, he would think about this, probably has the most dirt on David, because he's David's confidant. Let me butter him up. Let me warm up to him. And he recruited Ahithophel to basically turn on David. And by the way, put yourself now in David's heart when he finds out. We'll see this in just a moment. How do you think David felt? Here was his trusted advisor, someone who he's bore his own heart to. How do you think he would feel learning that now Ahithophel is no longer in David's camp, but in the camp of Absalom? Absolutely betrayed. That's a good word, right? Absolutely betrayed. Now stay with me here. Now we're going to see this in just a moment. In fact, we'll see this in just a moment. So what's happening? Absalom's getting more and more people to side with him, and it's becoming more and more difficult for David. And so David knows, hey, in verse 13 of chapter 15, now a messenger came to David saying, the hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom. And so what David does, verse 14, so David said to all of his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, arise, let us flee, or we shall not escape from Absalom. Make haste for depart, lest he overtake us suddenly and become disaster upon us and strike the city with the edge of the sword. Now think about this. David is now once again on the run. He's on the run. And step by step, the kingdom is being pulled away from him. Absolutely. I give David a lot of credit here that he's trying to do exactly that. He's still trying to keep peace among the nation, right? As you said, don't want a civil war going on. So we see Ahithophel right off the bat. He's convinced David's most trusted advisor to come be a part of that. If you fast forward to verse 31 of chapter 15, what does David do when learning about Ahithophel has now aligned himself with Absalom? Verse 31 chapter 15 says, then someone told David, saying, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. And David said, now watch this, O Lord, I pray, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. What did he do? He began to pray. And God, I pray that my trusted advisor, as he advises Absalom, Lord, I'm praying that Absalom won't receive his advisement. And by the way, that's exactly what God does in this particular case. Because if you go to chapter 16 now and lock in on verse 31, or 21 rather, it's chapter 16, verse 21. Huh? Yeah, I'm sorry. Chapter 16, verse 21. And it says Ahithophel. And Ahithophel was also I think a military genius too. And he advises, no, I'll take that back. I'll catch up. In verse 21, and Ahithophel said to Absalom, go in your father's concubines. Now, this is, man, my gosh. Go into your father's concubines, whom he has left to keep the house, and all Israel will hear that you are abhorred by your father. Then the hands of all who are with you will be strong. Here's what he's doing. He said, I want you to go and be among the women that your dad has these relationships with, and I want you to have these sexual escapades with. And again, to do this in the open, I'm not talking about letting them be peeping toms. That everybody knows, hey, we don't have to put two and two together to figure out two plus two is 4. We know what you're doing in there, right? But you're doing this with your own father's concubines. So look what they did, verse 22. So they pitched a tent for Absalom on top of the house, and Absalom went into his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Verse 23, now the advice of Ahithophel, which he gave in those days, was one, if he had inquired at the oracle of God, so was all the advice of Ahithophel, both with David and with Absalom. Fast forward to chapter 17. Now, what did David pray would be the advice that God would do with the advice? Make it foolish, right? Skip down to chapter 17, verse 23. He has given advice to Ahithophel. Ahithophel is not going to listen to, Absalom's not going to listen to him. And Ahithophel does something. Verse 23. Now, when Ahithophel saw that his advice was not followed, that is, Absalom has not followed his advice on some other things, he saddled a donkey and arose and went to his house and to his city, and he put his household in order. And what did he do? He hanged himself and died. By the way, does that sound familiar? Say it loud and proud, Alan. Judas. That's exactly what I got to thinking. This is the Old Testament illustration of Judas. Not just what he did in the New Testament, but this is Ahithophel, if you will, is an Old Testament Judas in this particular case. He lived like Judas because he betrayed David, and he died like Judas. Go back to chapter 16, and let's pick up on the other guy, not just Ahithophel, but there's a guy by the name of Shimei. Verse 5 says, now when King David came to Bahurim, there was a man from the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. Now watch this. This dude, man, he came out. What did he do? He cursed continually as he came. So David's coming out of the house, and he's cursing at David. Okay? Well, what was he saying? Look at verse 7. And Shimei said, thus when he cursed, come out, you bloodthirsty man, you rogue. And notice what he says in verse 8. David, you want to know why you're experiencing all of this trouble? I'll tell you why. Verse 8, the Lord has brought upon you all the blood of the house of Saul. You're the reason that Saul is dead, and you're reaping what you've sowed. You got to love guys like Abishai, though, in verse 9. Then Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said to the king, why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Please, let me go over and take off his head. Now, aren't you grateful for those who will come and have your back? You have people in your life that will have your back. Okay? I'm not talking about have your back even when you're immoral or unethical. Okay? I would never want people that. I don't want people telling me what I want to hear. I want people to be able to tell me what I need to hear. And I've tried to surround myself with people that will tell me what I need to hear, not just what I want to hear, right? And so Abishai says, hey, You want me to take care of him for you? Why are you allowing him to get away with that? You want me to go take care? I'll take his head off for you. But you know what? I'm really proud of David, to tell you the truth, when you stop and think about it. Because what does David do? What does David do? Look at verse 11. This takes a big man to do this. And David said to Abishai and all his servants, see how my son who came from my own body seeks my life. How much more now may this Benjaminite? What did he tell him to do? Let him alone. Let him curse, for so the Lord has ordered him. David is taking the high road. And that had to have been very hard. I don't know that anybody likes being made fun of or being heckled, let alone being cursed at, right? And if that wasn't bad enough, skip down to verse 13 of chapter 16, because he moves from not only cursing at David and taunting him. Notice what he does now in verse 13. And as David and his men went along the road, Shimei went along the hillside opposite him, cursed as he went. And what did he do now? He threw stones at him and kicked up dust. Now the king and all the people who were with him became weary, so they refreshed themselves there. Well, where did he go? What did he do? Go back to chapter 15. I told you we're going back and forth. Look at verse 23. Let me point out something to you. I think this is pretty interesting. You kind of compare Old Testament to New Testament here. Verse 23 says this of chapter 15. Okay, chapter 15, verse 23. It says, and all the country wept with a loud voice, and all the people crossed over, the king himself. And what did they cross over? The brook Kidron. Does anybody know anything about the brook Kidron? You should know a little something about it, because I told you when we were talking about when Jesus went to the Garden of Gethsemane, as he came down out of Jerusalem. Remember, you have the hillside where the Temple Mount is, where the old city of Jerusalem and the city of David is on one side, and on the other side you have, anybody know what's on the other side? The Mount of Olives. You come down the Mount of Olives, you run into the Garden of Gethsemane. You continue to go. What separates the city of Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives is the brook Kidron. When the sheep that were to be slaughtered for the Passover were slaughtered, the blood from those sheep would run in that stream of the brook Kidron. Think about this. So David crosses from Jerusalem over toward the Mount of Olives to the brook Kidron. We'll see that he goes to Mount of Olives in just a moment. The same path that Jesus would have taken before he's arrested and crucified. Watch this. Look at verse 30 of chapter 15. As he crossed over the brook Kidron, verse 30, where did he go? So he went up as the ascent of the Mount of Olives, and he wept as he went, and he had his head covered and went barefoot, and all the people who were with him covered their heads and went up weeping as they went up. Verse 31, then someone said to David, well, we already read that part. Skip down to verse 32. Now it happened when David had come to the top of the mountain, the Mount of Olives, where he worshiped God. There was Hushai the Archite coming to meet him with his robe torn and dust on his head. So we see David's return. Absalom's return. Absalom's rebellion. So he's trying to rip the kingdom from David. Now you remember there was something that Absalom was very proud of. Does anybody remember what he was proud of? His hair. Well, his hair is going to become part of his undoing. When we come to chapter 18, we see Absalom's ruin. Absalom's ruin. Now, we already know that David was a brilliant military strategist. Look what he does in chapter 18. In fact, look at verse 5. Chapter 18, verse 5. And the king commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, saying, now watch this, underscore this, because he wants Absalom taken. Look, I want you to kind of save, not just me, but I want you to kind of save Absalom from himself. And he gives them a very distinct order. Okay, you look back at verse 2, he divides his army into thirds, right? Verse 2 says, and David sent 1/3 of the people under the hand of Joab, another under the hand of Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and 1/3 under the hand of Attai, the Gittite. And the king said to the people, I will also surely go out with you myself. Skip down to verse 5. Here's what he tells them to do. And the king had commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, the leader of these thirds, saying, now watch this, read it with me, deal gently for whose sake? My sake with the young man Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave all the captains orders concerning Absalom. You've read the story. Are they going to deal gently with him? Anything but deal gently. But would you agree that David has made his point very clear? Fast forward to verse 9, chapter 18. Then Absalom met the servants of David. Absalom rode on a mule. The mule went under the thick boughs of a great terebinth tree. We see that a lot in the Old Testament. And his head caught in the terebinth. Now, how in the world did he catch his head in a tree? So he was left hanging between heaven and earth, and the mule, which was under him, went on. So get this. He's swinging from the tree by his hair. Would you say that he's a sitting duck here or a swinging duck? Verse 10, now a certain man saw it and told Joab and said, I saw Absalom hanging in a terebinth tree. So Joab said to the man who told him, you just saw him? And why did you not strike him there to the ground? I would have given you 10 shekels of silver and a belt. Now again, I think it was you, Karen, or somebody said last week or a couple weeks ago about what a mercenary Joab was. He just loved killing people. Well, look at verse 12. He says, but the man said to Joab, though I were to receive 1,000 shekels of silver in my hand, I would not raise my hand against the king's son, for in our hearing the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, saying, beware, lest anyone touch the young man Absalom. Otherwise, I would have dealt falsely against my own life, for there is nothing hidden from the king, and you yourself would have set yourself against me. Look at verse 14. Then Joab said, I cannot linger with you. He's basically what he's saying, you know what, you coward. I cannot linger with you. And he took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them through Absalom's heart while he was still alive in the midst of the terebinth tree. And 10 young men who bore Joab's armor surrounded Absalom and struck and killed him. So Joab blew the trumpet, and the people returned from pursuing Israel, for Joab held back the people. And they took Absalom and cast him into a large pit in the woods and laid a very large heap of stones over him. Then all Israel fled, everyone to his own tent. Verse 18, then Absalom in his lifetime had taken and set up a pillar for himself, which is in the king's valley, for he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. He called the pillar after his own name. To this day, he called it Absalom's monument. Word eventually gets back to David that his son is dead. Skip down to verse 18. We just read that. Verse 33, rather, of chapter 18. How does the king take this news? Then the king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, he said thus, O my son Absalom, my son, Absalom, if only I had died in your place. Oh, my son, my son. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son. Isn't that something? He was willing to die for his own son, but he wasn't willing to spend any time with him. Can I tell you what Absalom needed more than anything else in his life? He needed his father to say, son, I forgive you. And he needed his father to invest time and energy into his life. And I'm absolutely convinced, had David done that, we'd be reading a different story in Scripture. You know whose blood really is on the hands of Absalom? Oh, it was Joab. It was his father. because what he needed for the most from his dad did not give him. Let me ask you this. If you were teaching this lesson, what would be some takeaways and what would be some applications that we can make today? Not always easy, is it? Especially when you've got a deep hurt. I mean, think about what Absalom did. I mean, it was bad enough that Amnon did what he did. But in that day, really, David lost two sons.
He also didn't accept his responsibility.
Yeah, so we need to be willing to forgive, but we also need to be willing to accept responsibility, take ownership of what we've done. That's a lost, or in this case, what we didn't do, right? We're talking about sins of commission and the sins of omission. Sins of commission are those things that we do that God specifically tells us not to do, and the sins of omission are those things that we do, fail to do what God specifically tells us to do. So that kind of is two sides of the same coin, right? Yeah. What else? What else do you think? Boom. That's what I was looking for. She said, your kids watch what you do. You ever heard this? Do as I say, not as I do. That doesn't work with your kids. My stepdad was a chain smoker. I mean, literally started smoking from the time he got up to the time he went to bed. I don't know how many times how many packs of cigarettes that he went through in a day. But I'll tell you, me and my two older brothers, I can't speak for my younger brother, he was too young, but me and my two older brothers, we were notorious about stealing his cigarettes. And he would come to us and say, why are y'all stealing my cigarettes? You should not be smoking. I'm telling you, and you guys know this to be true. My own kids did this to me. Made me feel about that high. And I can't give you anything specific that just stands out in my mind, or I would. I'd confess my sin to you, but there's nothing that really stands out in my mind. But there were many times that I would say, hey, don't be doing that. Don't say that. I'll give you an example, like the word stupid. They'd call each other, you're stupid. I would say, hey, don't say that word. Dad, you say that word. So stuff like that, You're right. If I'm not going to, if my expectation is for you not to say that word, then I shouldn't be using that word either. Not just not in front of you, right?
You go into your gray area, your kids think that's an okay spot, but you do it. So then they start from there and proceed into their gray area.
Very, very good point. Very good point. Very good point.
But on the other hand, sometimes they see what the repercussions are and go the other way.
Rebel.
No, I don't mean rebel. I mean, yeah, that's what I'm trying to say.
I know for me, like I think I told y'all this story before. When I was in high school, I knew no matter what I did, I was going to be found out, right? And I'm still amazed at how my mother would find out. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have email. You couldn't text message. How is it that I did something at school and she knew about it since I walked in the door? Huh? Yeah, I know landline, but I'm telling you, I'm thinking, how in the world did you know? We went to church, and the majority of the people in the church were educators, and they were friends with my mom. I had no chance, right? I always got found out. And so I have to ask myself, hey, I know I'm going to get caught, but is the consequences going to be worth it? And oftentimes the consequences was a trip to the principal's office for SWATs. I think they ought to bring that back. Corporal punishment. It was a deterrent for me. I know that. And I'm not saying that SWATs are the answer to everything, and they're not. Some kid, I don't care. Whip me all you want, right? I'm talking about being abusive. But I get what you're saying. Sometimes it's a deterrent, Hey, I see what the consequence of that, and I don't want the consequence of that, so I'm not going to do that. In some cases, that absolutely is true. Can you think of anything else?
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Didn't David, on his deathbed or somewhere along the line, say, and that guy, he'll take care of him?
Yeah. Yeah, deal with him. Yeah. It definitely come back to him. He did. He didn't forget it. You're saying, you know what? I may forgive, but I don't forget. David didn't forget. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? Did I make a note to myself? One of the things I said, many times we see our own sins in we see in the sins of our sons and daughters, we see our own sins. We talked about that a little bit. I wrote in here with exclamation points, make your children a priority. Unfortunately, a lot, and Greg, you've seen this as an educator. We have any other educators in here? You guys were, how about I could forget about you two? I'm sure you saw it on being a football coach, that you saw absentee fathers and absentee parents where parents are being raised by video games or being raised by TV, right? Um, and we're a generation now that's seeing that even more today because parents don't know how to parent because they didn't get an example from their own parents. That's all I had. Anything else? Yes, ma'am. Say that again.
David started out with his walk with God in his young years very strong and close to God and real dependent. But as he aged, it seemed like he pulled away. He didn't do like he was supposed to. He relaxed.
Sounds familiar, don't it? Yeah.
Beware.
Yeah. And I think no matter how grounded you think that you may be, you are just one step away from entering into a backslidden state. Right? Yeah. Good point.
Well, plus he had absolute power, so that's absolute.
Didn't really have, other than God, he didn't have anybody holding him accountable. Right? Didn't have any, yeah. But God would have to send that guy, right? Oh, there you go. After you hear what Donna said, he started reading his own press clippings, if you will. Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that, Donna. I think there's absolutely a lot of truth to that. Good point. Anything else? I'm assuming we have already